But in order to know more, we're very much delighted to have with us Egyptologist Mr. Samir Abbass to elaborate more on the mysteries of the Great Sphinx. Good morning to you, Mr. Abbass.
Good morning, Hannah.
Good morning,
Good morning, Nashwa.
So first of all, let's shed the light on the Sphinx. We usually talk about the pyramids and about many of our monuments, but usually we want to know more about the Sphinx, this important statue actually standing as if he's guarding the pyramids.
Yes, I would like to remind our audience that this is our third or fourth actually episode from our series about mysteries of ancient Egypt. So we made an introduction, and then about the Great Pyramid, the mysteries of the Great Pyramid, and who built it and how it was built. And today we're still in Giza area. The Sphinx is still in Giza area, and we've been doing like 3 episodes so far. So the Sphinx, there is, with no exaggeration, it is the most important art piece in the history of mankind. It is made from one single piece of stone. The single piece of stone is 70 meters long and 20 meters height, which is made from one single piece, and that is a great of a sculpture. Sorry, that's like a phenomenal work in sculpturing this piece with no error, because there is no chance of making a single mistake or a single error while sculpturing this one single piece, because you cannot have it replaced. So before talking about the details of the Sphinx, I would like to help you to imagine how the ancient Egyptians see the Sphinx, how it was viewed from the ancient Egyptian perspective. So when you go to Giza pyramids today, most probably you will enter from what's called the Mina House gate, and that's when you will see the Great Pyramid, which is very obvious in front of you, and then you have to drive around to see the second pyramid of Hoffa and Menkaura, and then at the end of your trip in Giza you will see the Sphinx, and you will reach the Sphinx from the back, which is completely opposite the route which is the ancient Egyptians did their trip to Giza area back in that time. They came from the Nile River, using the Nile River as a highway, and then there was a side canal aligned with the Sphinx. They were sailing the Nile River until they reached the Sphinx, and most probably the best time for them, or the most common time for them to visit the Sphinx, it was during the sunrise. Why? Because the sun will rise facing the Sphinx face, and that will be the best time to see the Sphinx and the beauty of the Sphinx. They will arrive in their boats, and most probably that will be like rich and dignitaries and royal family members, and they will get off from the boat and they will get to the Sphinx Temple. That's something which is hardly seen in our visits today. So I'm not confusing the people. Temple, which is the Valley Temple of Hoffa. I'm talking about the temple to the right of the Valley Temple of Hoffa, which is the Sphinx Temple, is one of the very few sun-cult temple remains or preserves in Egypt. They will go into the temple, they will worship the sun god and the Sphinx before going through Hoffa Temple or Khufu Temple or Menkaura Temple and walking along the causeway to the pyramids. So that was the route of the ancient Egyptians back in that time. So the Sphinx, as Hala introduced, is dates back to the Old Kingdom, the same time when the pyramids being built. So it is commonly known that it was built or made by Hoffa or for Hoffa, but I'm afraid to say that that's a debating subject now, and that's one of the mysteries of the Sphinx. Who owned the Sphinx? Even which is 90% of books written, which is saying that it was Hoffa. It was mainly said it was Hoffa because early archaeologists, they named it after Hoffa because it's aligned with the complex of Hoffa, which is the second largest pyramid in Giza. But with modern research, with in-depth research, it's difficult or nearly impossible to be named after Hoffa for the reasons I was going to say right now. For those who had more deep knowledge about the ancient Egyptian art and ancient Egyptian history, for those who like to go to the Egyptian Museum, for example, there is a beautiful statue of Hoffa made from a black stone.
Yes, very famous there.
Yes, a very beautiful black stone, and this statue was found in his temple. And this is showing the features of Hoffa with elongated, like kind of face structure, which is different than the Sphinx, which is slightly more elongated. And also the most important, it has a beard. The Sphinx doesn't have a beard. There was a beard attached to the Sphinx, but in the New Kingdom, 1,000 years after being sculptured. But in the originally, when the Sphinx has been a sculpture, there is no evidence that it has a beard. So we have king from the Old Kingdom from the 4th dynasty, which is Hoffa, the father of Hoffa. He has 67 depictions has been found in the Egyptian art. There is no single depiction of them has beard, which is giving more supporting the theory that it belongs to Hoffa. The face structure of Hoffa is very much like, there is only one of these statues in the Egyptian Museum, which is showing like a small one of Hoffa, which is very much like the face structures of the Sphinx. And so, which is mean that these Sphinxes most probably represent Hoffa, not Hoffa, and that's one of the mysteries of the Sphinx. Even this statue is standing now for 4,500 years, very well studied. Still, we don't know who exactly sculptured the Sphinx. So that is a new theory. It belongs to Hoffa, but most probably is not sculptured by him, but by his son Jedefra, dedicated to
What does it represent, Mr. Samir?
That's another very good actually point to discuss. So the art in ancient Egypt has a purpose. And the ancient Egyptians, they didn't decorate their temples or make statues only because they have a free time and they would like to show their skills. No, they have a
always sending a message.
Exactly, they have a message, and they have a very deep message. And the Sphinx, for them, or for the ancient Egyptians, that was like a media. How to introduce a certain idea, and this idea was very important. So to find out or to know this idea, we have to go back to the ancient Egyptian culture and the ancient Egyptian religion, which is the main influence of culture, or art and architecture in ancient Egypt. So in the ancient Egyptian religion, they believed in the sun god. And they believed in the sun god protected by two lions. Now we are talking about the Sphinx, a lion body and the head of the king. They believed in the king, the pharaoh, as the son of the sun god, and which had a divine power as well. So what we have in the Sphinx is the head of the king guarded by the lion, like the sun guarded by the lion. So the lion is the only sure thing here. So then we have the king and the sun as a way to say that the lion or the Sphinx is guarding the pharaoh as the lion guarding the sun, which is mean that the king and the sun god, they are equal. So that will serve lots of things. So first of all, that is serve or promoting or shed light on the divine power of the king. And they have to make it so big to impress people, to promote for this idea, the king is divine. And that is their way to introduce that through the Sphinx. Second, if the king is divine, of course, nobody will argue his decisions. And that's giving a political support of the king as well. So that is answering actually your questions about the meaning of the Sphinx, why it was made in that. But the interesting fact that before this Sphinx being made, there was hardly any Sphinxes in Egypt. After being made, it became a very common way of showing.
This is what I wanted to ask about.
Yes.
Actually, this is the first Sphinx, but we started to see some other talking about the design itself of the
Yes.
Sphinx. So the significance of this when it comes to ancient Egyptians thinking about kings, and we know that they used to be half gods at that time.
Yes, yes. So they used to be half gods when they are alive, but the people believe them they will be elevated to the status of a full god when they die or when they elevate to the heaven.
In the afterlife.
And the pyramids was built not as a tombs as people think. They house their bodies, but from their perspective is a resurrection machine for the ascension of their soul up to the heaven. So coming to your point about so the Sphinx, when it was made, it was not hardly any other Sphinxes actually known. There was some in early dynastic period in Abydos. There was some connections found by burying some lions with the king, but it's still not very connection with the Sphinx yet. So, but after that, the ancient Egyptian realized that it is the best way to refer to the divine power of the king, and that's why after the Sphinx, almost every king, they made at least one Sphinx for them. Nobody was able to make that something which is as big as the Old Kingdom one, but there is one of the kings which is he lined a road with 2 rows of Sphinxes, 3 kilometers road, 2 miles road from Karnak to Luxor Temple. So when you walk along this road between the most important temples in that time in the New Kingdom, so you by the end you believe that it was the king is a god and equal to the sun god. So there is still lots of mysteries about the Sphinx and different topics which can be associated with the Sphinx as well. And the beard of the Sphinx. That's another interesting story. So that's another big debate. Is the Sphinx has a beard or no? Actually, is both. You know, both is right. So when it was first made, there was no beard. But that was added later on.
Why?
1,000. Okay, that's because it wasn't the style still, you know. So remember that art in ancient Egypt is like fashion today.
It was evolving. Yes.
Exactly. So it was evolving, you know, and that's why the specialist in the Egyptian art, when they look at like a certain statue or depictions, so from the dressing code, from the headdress, from the hairstyle, they can tell from which era. Like you can tell that when you see like a movie or a photo,
50s
it
or
was 50s or
70s
60s or
yeah.
70s. So in that time, no, there was hardly, as I mentioned earlier, that there was 67 depictions of Khufu. There is no one which has a beard among them. So later on, so they started introducing like a new fashion, the beard, and it became very common after that. So, and the beard was added later on by Thutmose IV, and that will bring us a very interesting subject. I was about to forget actually when you mentioned the beard thing. So Thutmose IV, 1,000 years after the Sphinx, in that time, the ancient Egyptian kings, they were not living in Memphis, close to the Sphinx, close to Giza. No, they were living in Luxor. That was the capital in that time. So Thutmose IV, he made a trip to Giza, and something that was for hunting or for military training. And it was in summertime, very hot, and he decided to sleep in a shade place, and he slept under the head of the Sphinx. That's what he talks about actually in his diary. And in that time, the Sphinx was neglected, was not well maintained, and there was shifting sand which is covering the body of the Sphinx, except the head. The head was projecting. All of these old pictures, which is here in the old days, that was very much like, that was only 1,000 years after the Sphinx has been sculptured. He dreamed the Sphinx is speaking to him. And the Sphinx told him that he will be the next king of Egypt. And he was the heir of the throne, or maybe there is another heir to the throne, but he became the king of Egypt. But the Sphinx asked him, if he will be the king of Egypt, he should come and clean the sand from around his body, which he did. So he did that, and he wrote down the entire story on a tablet, which is between the two bows now, which is known as just the Dream Stela, very famous one. Yeah. There is lots of big question marks and mysteries about this story, because the classical archaeologists, they used to believe in everything written in hieroglyphics, which is not happening today. So in my personal interpretation of the Dream Stela, that was made up by Thutmose IV. The story has been completely made up, because in that particular time there was a serious political argument between the priests of Amun and the kings of Egypt, and Thutmose IV, he made up this story in order to walk away from the priests of Amun, their influence, just as a way to tell them it was not you or not your God which has made me the king, it was Rahor Akhti. That was the name of the Sphinx in that time, Rahor Akhti, which has made me the king. And that is the best way from my understanding to explain how they didn't hesitate to make up stories, associate that with the Sphinx in order to gain some political power. Yes. That would bring us also to the name of the Sphinx, and there was different names. There was Shesb-Ankh, which is most probably the original name, which means the living form of the king, and Rahor Akhti associated with Ra and associated with Horus as well during the New Kingdom. Abul Hol, which is the father of the terror, that's what the Arabs called him. The terror, the father of the terror. And from Shesb-Ankh came the word Sphinx, corrupted by the Greek historians into the Sphinx. So the sad news is, so the Sphinx is deteriorating. You know, by the way, the Sphinx, before talking about the sad news, is the Sphinx was already painted back in the old days, and when you look at the Sphinx actually face or head, you can see some of the remaining of these paintings today. So the sad news is the Sphinx is from one peak, like sedimentary rock. Limestone is sedimentary rock, and this rock has different layers. Yes. And because of that is an beeling, especially that there was a rise of the underground water throughout the ages, especially in the modern time, starting from 1980 or 1970, after building the high dam, which is increased the ground level water all over the country, even the Sphinx. And because of there is salt within the rock, and rock, some layers of rock, they are porous, so the water travel through the rock until it evaporates near the surface and cause a layer of salt, which is build the Sphinx. And that's why there was different renovation projects. And the most, like a big one, which is that was in the last 20 years of making these trenches and training system around the Sphinx. But actually there was, even from as early as the New Kingdom, 1,000 years after the Sphinx being made, there was a restoration project. And the restoration of the Sphinx, or the restoration layers today, dates back to almost 8 different historical periods.
So would you tell us briefly, because we're running out of time, the story of the nose, another mysterious aspect?
Thanks Hella for reminding me about the nose. You know, there's another mystery of the Sphinx. So it's in most of the guidebooks saying that it was used as a shooting target by Napoleon, but there is a Danish artist. He visited the Sphinx in Egypt and he made a portrait of the Sphinx that was like almost 50 years before Napoleon and the Sphinx, and the nose wasn't there. It wasn't used by as a shooting target. Napoleon had high respect, even when I disagree with him in many other political aspects, but he had a high respect of the ancient Egyptian history and ancient Egyptian monuments, and he will never do that. There is a very strong marks between the two eyes, right there at the Sphinx, of a chisel mark. You can see it with the naked eye. If you came close, you can see it. So the Sphinx is a fabulous story. And we can, I try to prove that as much as I can, these 15 or 20 minutes, but it's still secret of the Sphinx not being revealed yet. There is a story of a tunnel inside the body of the Sphinx, which is, it was explored, and they said that there is hardly anything inside, but it's still some secrets not being revealed yet. It's still, until now, we don't know who exactly owned the Sphinx, who exactly sculptured the Sphinx.
Mr. Samir Abbass, Egyptologist, I'd like to thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you very much.
Thanks.